senior archivist has had observed 17 species during their long career. None had troubled them quite like the humans. The observation ship hung in the darkness beyond the humans' moon, cloaked and silent. For 6 months, Haz and their team had watched the blue planet spin, recording everything. The data painted a disturbing picture. Humans fought constantly. They had weapons that could destroy their entire world. They poisoned their own air and water. They divided themselves into arbitrary groups and killed each other over invisible lines on maps. Another conflict has started, reported junior researcher, their voice carrying the clicking undertone of their species. The humans call it a border dispute. Has manipulated the holographic display with their three-fingered hands. The images showed human soldiers, armed and angry. Then, just as quickly, the images shifted to show humans building hospitals, creating art, exploring their ocean depths with wonder in their eyes. Contradictions, Has murmured, always contradictions. The Galactic Concordat had maintained peace for over 4,000 cycles. Every species followed the same path: observation, evaluation, uplift, integration. The Concordat brought civilization to the savage corners of space, but humanity challenged every assumption. They had split the atom and reached their moon while still engaging in tribal warfare. They had built space stations while millions of their own kind starved. They reached for the stars with bloody hands. The Council would meet soon to decide humanity's fate. Has suspected they would vote for quarantine, lock the humans on their world for another 1,000 years, check back when they had grown up, if they survived that long. Has filed their report and tried not to think about it. The humans were not their problem anymore. The Council would decide. 3 days later, everything changed. The distress signal came from the outer system, near the massive gas giant the humans called Jupiter. Survey Ship 7 had suffered a catastrophic cascade failure. Their power core was dying. Life support would fail in hours. The ship carried 43 crew members representing 7 different species. The observation team received the emergency broadcast simultaneously with the human space station that orbited their planet. Has watched the communications with clinical interest, curious to see how the humans would react. They expected fear. Perhaps the humans would think the signal was an invasion. Perhaps they would ignore it, focus on their own survival. Instead, the human station exploded into action. "This is Station Commander Sarah," a human voice crackled across the channels. "We've received your distress call. Help is coming, hold on." Has felt their respiratory system flutter in surprise. The humans couldn't possibly help. They barely had functional spacecraft. The distance was too far, the time too short. It would be a suicide mission. Yet the humans moved. The observation team's sensors tracked 4 human vessels detaching from their station. They were ungainly things, retrofitted mining ships and cargo haulers, patched together with visible welds and improvised components. They burned fuel at wasteful rates, pushing their primitive engines beyond safe limits. "They will die," said quietly. "Their ships cannot survive the journey." But the humans kept coming. Has watched as the vessels pushed through the asteroid belt, navigating with reckless skill. 2 ships suffered damage and had to turn back. The other 2 continued, their hulls groaning under the stress. Survey Ship 7's captain, a methodical individual named S, made contact with the human vessels. "You should not risk yourselves," S said, their translator rendering the formal Concordat diplomatic phrases. "The probability of success is minimal." "Nobody dies alone out here if we can help it," came the reply in simple, direct human language. The speaker identified herself as Pilot Maria Santos. "We're 15 minutes out. Get your people ready to evacuate." The rescue was chaos. The human ships lacked proper docking mechanisms, so the humans improvised, using magnetic grapples and extending flexible tubes between the vessels. They worked with urgent efficiency, moving the Survey Ship 7 crew across the gap in the vacuum of space. The human ships were cramped and uncomfortable, filled with strange smells and unfamiliar technology. Has monitored everything from their observation post. They should have maintained distance, remained objective. Instead, they found themselves leaning toward the display respiratory system rapid with something that might have been hope. The last crew member crossed just as Survey Ship 7's core reached critical failure. The explosion lit up the darkness, a brief nova that faded into nothing. The human vessels turned toward the inner system, carrying their unexpected cargo. The journey back took 3 days. The observation team followed, no longer bothering to hide. What did it matter now? First contact had been made, protocol shattered. Everything had changed. Doctor was the human who managed the rescued crew. He was middle-aged by human standards, with gray in his hair and smile lines around his eyes. He moved through the cramped human ship with easy confidence, treating each injured crew member with gentle competence. "You're going to be fine," he told researcher, who had suffered a fractured limb in the evacuation. "Might be a bit uncomfortable for a few days, but we'll take good care of you." Still trembling from shock, managed to click out a question. "Why did you come? You knew the danger." Doctor paused, considering the question with surprising seriousness. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That's enough, isn't it?" But it wasn't just medical care. The humans brought food, carefully selected to match each species' dietary requirements based on hasty research. They brought entertainment, music and books translated on the fly by their primitive computers. They brought blankets, comfort items, and most strange of all, they brought laughter. Commander visited the rescued crew personally. She was compact and efficient, moving through the ship with military precision. But her eyes were kind when she looked at the frightened aliens crowded into her cargo bay. "I know this isn't comfortable," she said. "We're not really set up for passengers, but you're safe now. That's what matters." Captain S approached her, their posture indicating formal respect. "We owe you a debt beyond calculation," they said. "Your people have sacrificed much. What payment do you require?" Looked genuinely confused. "Payment? You're serious?" She shook her head. "We don't want payment. You were in trouble. We helped. That's how it works." "That is not how it works," S replied. "The Concordat maintains precise protocols for exchange of services. We must compensate you." "Tell you what," said, her face breaking into a smile. "When we get back, how about you tell us about the galaxy out there? We've been wondering if we're alone for a long time. Knowing we're not, that's payment enough." Has watched this exchange from their ship, recording everything. Nothing in the data had prepared them for this. The humans who built weapons capable of destroying worlds had risked their lives for strangers. The humans who fought endless wars had offered help without thought of reward. When the human ships docked with their station, has made a decision that would end their career or define it. They broke protocol. They made contact. The airlock cycled open and has stepped onto the human station, breathing recycled air that tasted of metal and strange chemicals. Commander waited for them, flanked by armed guards. Has noted the weapons but also noted they were not pointed. "Welcome to Station Unity," said. "I'm guessing you're the ones who've been watching us." "Yes," has admitted. There seemed little point in deception. "I am Senior Archivist Has of the Galactic Concordat. I have been observing your species for evaluation." "Evaluation," repeated. "Pass or fail kind of thing." "Something like that." Studied them for a long moment, and what's the verdict? Has felt their respiratory system flutter again, this time with something closer to uncertainty. "I do not know," they admitted. "Your species confuses us. You are violent and compassionate, destructive and creative. You reach for the stars while fighting among yourselves." "Yeah," said. "That sounds about right. We're complicated." She gestured down the corridor. "Come on, let me show you around. And then maybe you can explain why you've been lurking out there instead of saying hello." The station tour took hours. Has saw the recycling systems held together with improvised repairs. They saw the gardens where humans grew food in careful hydroponic arrays. They saw the schools where young humans learned mathematics and art simultaneously. They saw the memorial wall, covered with names of humans who had died reaching for space, and the observation deck where those same humans gathered to watch their planet turn below them. In the station's central hub, human children played a game that involved mock combat, chasing each other with toy weapons and elaborate sound effects. Then, moments later, the same children worked together to build an elaborate structure from magnetic blocks, cooperating with patient focus. Has stopped walking, watching the children. They fight and then they build, they said quietly. They hurt each other and then they help. They're learning, Doctor said. He had joined the tour uninvited, his presence comfortable and warm. That's what humans do. We learn, sometimes the hard way. The Concordat believes violence is primitive, has said. That civilization requires the abandonment of aggression. Does it? Asked. Or does civilization require knowing when to use aggression and when to set it aside? He nodded toward the children. Look at them. They're rough with each other, sure. But they're also learning boundaries, learning cooperation, learning when to compete and when to collaborate. You can't have one without the other. Has turned to look at the human doctor. You believe your violence makes you stronger. No, said. I believe our capacity for violence, paired with our capacity for compassion, makes us complete. We know how to fight, so we know why peace matters. We've seen destruction, so we value creation. You can't appreciate light without darkness. Later has stood in the observation deck looking down at Earth. The blue planet spun below, beautiful and troubled, ancient and young. Somewhere down there, humans were fighting. Somewhere else, they were healing, building and destroying, creating and consuming. Commander stood beside them. So what happens now, she asked. Do we pass your test? I do not know, has said honestly. I must return to the Concordat Council. They will decide your fate. Will you tell them what you saw here? Yes. And what did you see? Has considered the question carefully. I saw a species that risked their lives for strangers. I saw a species that asks for nothing in return. I saw, they paused, searching for words. I saw humans. Smiled, then I guess we'll find out if that's good enough. The council met 3 weeks later. Has presented their report to the assembled representatives of 40 species. They showed the data, the wars, the weapons, the environmental damage. They showed the contradictions, the violence, the chaos. And then they showed the rescue. Magistrate, a rigid individual who had served the council for 60 cycles, watched the footage with evident disapproval. They took unnecessary risks, said. They acted without proper authorization. They endangered themselves for beings they had never met. This is reckless behavior. Or heroic behavior, has countered, depending on perspective. The debate lasted for hours. Many representatives called for quarantine. Humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent. They needed more time to mature, to grow beyond their savage nature. But Captain S, recovered and standing as a witness, spoke in humanity's defense. They saved my crew, S said simply. When no one else could, when no one else would. They asked nothing in return. If this is savagery, perhaps we need to reconsider our definition. The vote was close. In the end, humanity was granted probationary membership in the Galactic Concordat. They would be allowed to leave their world, to explore, to join the galactic community. But they would be watched, restricted, guided toward civilization. Has returned to Station Unity to deliver the news personally. Commander received it with mixed feelings, pleasure at acceptance tempered by frustration at the limitations. Probationary membership, she said, like we're children who need supervision. The council believes you need guidance, has said, help to overcome your violent nature. Looked at them for a long moment. You know what I think? I think the galaxy forgot something important. I think you've been peaceful for so long you forgot why peace matters. You forgot what it costs. Perhaps has admitted. But this is the decision. Humanity will join us, but you must learn our ways. We'll try, said, but I hope the galaxy is ready for us, because we're going to do things differently. Has returned to their ship, their mission complete. But as they prepared to depart, they looked back at the human station one last time. Through the observation windows, they could see humans moving about their business. Fighting and loving, building and breaking, reaching always upward toward the stars. And has wondered, what if humanity's violence and compassion weren't contradictions at all? What if they were two sides of the same coin? What if the galaxy didn't need to civilize humanity? What if humanity needed to remind the galaxy of something it had forgotten? The thought troubled them all the way home. 6 months passed quickly in the grand scope of galactic time. For humanity, it was an eternity of frustration. The Concordat assigned cultural advisors to Earth. They arrived with the best intentions and the worst assumptions. Every human nation received representatives who would guide them toward proper civilization. The advisors brought rules, protocols, and endless bureaucracy. Humans were taught proper greetings, which involved complex gestures and formal phrases that took minutes to complete. They were instructed that direct eye contact was aggressive, that physical touch was inappropriate, that emotional expression was primitive. Human humor was deemed offensive. Human art was called crude. Human music was too loud, too chaotic, too filled with passion. Commander, now promoted to Earth's military liaison, sat through meeting after meeting where human customs were dissected and found wanting. She smiled through gritted teeth as advisors explained that humans needed to be more subtle, more patient, more civilized. We have been peaceful for 4,000 cycles, one advisor explained in a tone that dripped with condescension. We have evolved beyond violence. With time, you will too. Exchanged looks with Doctor, who had joined her as humanity's cultural representative. The expression was carefully neutral, but knew him well enough to see the frustration underneath. The worst part was the security restriction. Humans were barred from any position involving galactic defense or law enforcement. The official reason was tactfully worded, but the meaning was clear. Humans were too violent to be trusted with weapons, too aggressive to maintain peace. It stung particularly because had spent 20 years in the military, protecting people, maintaining order, making difficult decisions that kept others safe. Being told she was too dangerous to continue that work felt like a slap in the face. But humanity tried. They really did. They learned the formal greetings and the proper protocols. They modulated their voices and controlled their expressions. They filed the appropriate paperwork and waited for approval on decisions that needed to be made immediately. They tried to fit into the galaxy's expectations. Meanwhile, on the frontier, trouble was brewing. They had been violating Concordat space for months. They were a predatory species, aggressive and opportunistic. They had never joined the Concordat officially, but they had agreed to respect its borders. Now they were establishing a forward base near a peaceful colony world called Haven. The Concordat followed protocol. They sent formal warnings. They filed official complaints. They scheduled negotiations that would take place over months while they continued to raid supply lines and terrorize the colonists. Watched the situation deteriorate with growing frustration. She sat in briefing after briefing where Concordat officials explained the diplomatic process, the importance of patience, the necessity of following proper channels. They're attacking civilian transports, she said during one meeting. People are dying. The situation is regrettable, Magistrate replied, but we must respond appropriately. Violence only begets more violence. So does inaction, muttered. The crisis reached a breaking point when they attacked a colony transport carrying families from Haven to a safer location. The ship was unarmed, clearly marked as civilian. They boarded it anyway, taking over 100 hostages, including 23 children. The Concordat immediately filed a formal protest and scheduled an emergency diplomatic session. It would convene in 6 days. Received an encrypted message that night. It came from a desperate parent on Haven, a teacher named whose daughter was among the hostages. The message was simple: please, they're killing us and the galaxy does nothing. Please help. Stared at the message for a long time. Then she made several calls. 3 days later, an unauthorized human vessel departed from the outer edges of human space. Officially, it didn't exist. The crew consisted of retired soldiers, people who had left active service but had never really left the fight. They flew a ship that was off the books, armed with weapons that were supposedly decommissioned. Commanded the mission personally. Beside her sat Lieutenant James Park, a demolitions expert who had blown up more things than he cared to remember. Behind them, a team of 12 operators who specialized in the kind of work that civilized species didn't talk about. "This is going to end my career," said as they approached the base. "Probably," Park agreed. "Worth it, though." The base was a converted asteroid, heavily armed and arrogant. They didn't expect an attack because the Concordat didn't attack. They filed complaints. They negotiated. They didn't send teams of angry humans with guns and bad attitudes. The operation took 4 hours. The humans used tactics the Concordat considered barbaric: deception, infiltration, intimidation, and when necessary, precise violence. They moved through the base like ghosts, taking out guards silently, disabling systems efficiently. They used fear as a weapon, letting the see shadows and hear footsteps, never knowing where the humans would strike next. Park placed shaped charges at critical points throughout the base. "This is gonna make a beautiful boom," he said with satisfaction. They found the hostages in a converted cargo bay guarded by 6 warriors. The warriors were large, powerful, confident in their superiority. They had weapons. They had armor. They had numbers. What they didn't have was experience fighting humans. His team hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. Stun grenades, smoke, chaos. They never had a chance to use their weapons. When the smoke cleared, all 6 guards were unconscious, and the human team was already moving the hostages toward the extraction point. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, looked up with wide eyes. "Are you the cavalry?" she asked in a small voice. Knelt down to the child's level. "Yeah, kid, we're the cavalry, let's get you home." The extraction was textbook. The humans loaded the hostages onto their ship, set the charges, and were burning out of the system before they even understood what had happened. Behind them, the base's power systems exploded in a cascade of failures. The base survived, but it would be weeks before it was operational again. The leadership received a message, short and direct: "Return to your territory. Touch Concordat civilians again, and next time we won't be so gentle." Signed, the humans. The galaxy exploded with reaction. The Concordat Council called an emergency session. Magistrate demanded humanity's immediate expulsion from the Concordat. Was recalled to face court-martial for unauthorized military action, violation of diplomatic protocol, and about 15 other charges. The hearing was held on the Concordat's central station, a massive structure that housed representatives from every member species. Stood before the council, still in her combat gear, and refused to apologize. "You violated every protocol," said, their voice sharp with anger. "You acted without authorization. You used violence against a sovereign species. You have proven that humans are exactly what we feared: dangerous, unpredictable, savage." "We saved lives," replied simply. "You could have started a war. You were letting people die while you scheduled meetings." The council chamber erupted in argument. Representatives shouted in a dozen languages, their translators struggling to keep up. Some demanded humanity's expulsion. Others, surprisingly, called for leniency. Then the rescued colonists arrived. They came by the hundreds, filling the observation galleries. They represented a dozen different species, and they all had the same message. One by one, they about what the humans had done. They spoke of fear and hope, of waiting for help that never came, of giving up hope until the humans arrived. A father held up his daughter, the same little girl who had asked about the cavalry. "This is my child," he said, his voice breaking. "She is alive because humans acted when the Concordat would not. What does that say about civilization?" Has watched the proceedings with growing unease. They had argued for humanity's admission to the Concordat, believing that given time and guidance, humans would learn to be civilized. Now they wondered if they had been wrong, not about humanity, but about civilization itself. When it was Haz's turn to speak, they stood before the council and said something they had never thought they would say. "Perhaps we are asking the wrong question. We ask, how do we make humans less violent? We should ask, what has our peace cost us?" The chamber fell silent. "For 4,000 cycles we have lived without war," Haz continued. "We have achieved this through patience, diplomacy, and the threat of collective action. But we have achieved it also by allowing predators to prey on the weak, because responding would be uncivilized. We have bought our peace with the suffering of those who cannot defend themselves." Magistrates stood, their posture rigid with disapproval. "You suggest we abandon everything we have built, that we return to savagery." "I suggest that perhaps savagery and civilization are not opposites," Haz said. "Humans are savage, they are also civilized. They fight, but they know why they fight. They are violent, but they are also compassionate. They saved lives while we scheduled meetings. What does that make us?" The debate continued for hours. In the end, the vote was split. Would face consequences for her actions, but humanity would not be expelled. Instead, humanity would be restricted further, their movements monitored, their actions controlled. Accepted the judgment without comment. But as she left the chamber, she was met by an unexpected group. Senior officers from 3 different species waited for her, their expressions serious. "Commander," one said, a grizzled veteran named N who had fought in the last Galactic War 40 cycles ago. "We need to speak with you, privately." They met in a secured room. The officers were direct. The Concordat's military had become ceremonial, a formality maintained but no longer functional. They had forgotten how to fight. But the galaxy was changing. Species like them were testing boundaries. Threats were emerging, and the Concordat had no answer except diplomatic protests. "We need someone to teach us," N said. "Someone who remembers, you humans you never forgot." "The council would never approve," said. "The council doesn't need to know, not yet." N's expression was serious. "We start small, unofficial, train a few who train a few more, and when the galaxy needs us we'll be ready." Considered it. She thought about the rescued hostages, about 's daughter asking if she was the cavalry. She thought about all the people who would die while the Concordat filed paperwork. "All right," she said, "let's teach the galaxy how to fight again." Doctor found her later, sitting alone in the observation deck, watching stars drift past. He sat beside her without speaking, comfortable in the silence. "You did the right thing," he said finally. "Did I call us savages? Maybe he's right." "Thinks civilization means never getting your hands dirty," said. "He thinks peace means avoiding conflict. But that's not peace. That's just surrender to whoever's willing to be violent." "So what do we do?" Smiled. "We be human. We be savage when we need to be, civilized when we can be, and we never apologize for knowing the difference." Nodded slowly. She thought about the months ahead, about the training that would happen in the shadows, about the slow work of teaching a galaxy to defend itself. "The galaxy thinks we're dangerous," she said. "We are dangerous," replied. "That's what makes us useful." In the weeks that followed, small groups began to gather. Concordat soldiers who remembered the old ways met with human instructors who taught the new ones. They trained in abandoned stations, in the outer reaches of quiet systems, anywhere they could work without official notice. The humans taught tactics and strategy, but more than that, they taught mindset. They taught when to be patient and when to act immediately. They taught the difference between necessary violence and cruelty. They taught that protecting others sometimes meant making hard choices and living with the consequences. A philosophical species learned that sometimes debate must wait until after survival is secured. A peaceful herbivore species discovered they could be fierce protectors of their families. They learned human sayings: walk softly and carry a big stick. The price of peace is eternal vigilance. Nobody dies alone if we can help it. And slowly, quietly, the Concordat began to remember its teeth. The change took time, measured in years rather than days, but change was coming. 3 years after humanity's admission to the Concordat, the galaxy stood on a precipice. They had grown bold, expanding their territory in violation of established borders. Other predatory species, seeing the Concordat's weak response, began their own incursions. Pirates raided trade routes with impunity. Criminal syndicates operated openly. The Concordat's response remained unchanged. Diplomatic protests, scheduled negotiations, formal complaints that were filed and ignored. The galaxy's bureaucracy ground forward, slow and certain, while the frontier burned. Commander Sarah, now officially recognized as humanity's chief security advisor, despite the irony of the title, watched the deterioration with grim satisfaction. Not satisfaction that people were suffering, but that her warning was proving correct. The galaxy needed to remember how to defend itself. The training programs continued in secret. What had started as a handful of Concordat veterans meeting with human instructors had grown into a network spanning dozens of systems. They called themselves the Wardens, though the name had no official recognition. Had joined the program to the shock of many who knew them. The scholarly archivist now trained alongside soldiers, learning tactics and strategy. They were not particularly skilled at combat, but they brought something else: legitimacy. When Has spoke of the need for the Concordat to remember its strength, other intellectuals listened. I have studied 17 species, Has told a class of mixed Concordat soldiers. Everyone achieved civilization by learning when to set aside violence, not by forgetting how violence works. Humans never forgot. That is not a weakness. That is wisdom. Doctor had also found his place in the new order. He trained medics, teaching them not just how to heal, but how to heal under fire, how to prioritize in chaos, how to save lives when everything was falling apart. Medicine isn't just about knowledge, he explained to a class of wide-eyed students from a dozen species. It's about staying calm when others panic, same as combat. Different tools, same mindset. But the turning point came when they made their biggest mistake. They assembled a fleet, not a raiding force but an actual invasion armada, hundreds of ships carrying thousands of warriors. Their target, the Concordat itself. The message was clear. The Concordat was weak. The age of peaceful negotiation was over. The strong would take what they wanted. The Concordat Council received warning 2 weeks before the fleet would arrive. The emergency session that followed was chaos. Some representatives called for evacuation. Others suggested offering tribute. A few, mostly the oldest members, spoke vaguely of the old defenses, but admitted those systems had not been maintained in centuries. Magistrate, older now and less certain than before, called for one final attempt at negotiation. Surely we can reach an understanding, they said. Violence cannot be the answer. Sometimes violence is the only answer, said. She stood before the council not as a defendant this time, but as their only hope. They are coming to conquer. They don't want negotiation. They want submission. And what would you have us do? Asked. We have no military, no defense. The Concordat achieved peace by transcending such primitive needs. You didn't transcend anything, replied. You just got comfortable, Lucky for you, some of us never did. She activated a display. It showed ship positions throughout Concordat space. Hundreds of vessels, many of them the Concordat's own ships, long-neglected defense forces suddenly manned and operational, and scattered among them, human vessels and crews from a dozen other species. For 3 years we've been preparing, said, training your people, rebuilding your defenses, remembering what you forgot. To think they're invading a helpless prey. They're about to meet the galaxy's teeth. The council erupted in debate, but time was short and ultimately they had no choice. They authorized to coordinate the defense. The wardens were officially recognized, given emergency authority to act. The preparation took 12 days. Has worked with coordinating the diverse forces into something resembling a unified command. It was like herding chaos. Every species had different communication styles, different tactical thinking, different capabilities. The Concordat achieved peace because everyone agreed on protocols, has said, exhausted after a particularly difficult coordination session. Now we must achieve war the same way. War is messier than peace, replied, but we'll make it work. Lieutenant Park, now promoted to colonel, managed the defensive platforms. The ancient weapons had not been fired in centuries, their maintenance relegated to ceremonial keeper positions. Park's teams brought them back online, jury-rigging solutions when proper parts were unavailable. These guns are older than my great-grandmother, Park muttered, examining a massive particle cannon. And they were outdated when they were built, but they'll do. The fleet arrived on schedule, confident and powerful. Their ships were modern, their weapons fierce, their warriors eager for conquest. They emerged from faster-than-light travel expecting to find a cowering prey. Instead, they found the Concordat waiting. Commanded from the Central Defense Station, human and alien officers working side by side. The first exchange happened at extreme range. They fired, their weapons splashing against hastily raised shields. The Concordat fired back, ancient guns booming after centuries of silence. The first ship to die seemed almost surprised. It had expected easy victory, not resistance. The explosion was brief and bright. The battle was brutal. They had superior technology and experience. But the Concordat had desperation and, for the first time the will to fight. Ships on both sides died. Good people sacrificed themselves to save others. The void filled with debris and dying screams. Has commanded a mixed force, their ship flanked by human cruisers and Concordat defenders. They had trained for this, but training was nothing like the real thing. When a destroyer bore down on their position, has felt their respiratory system seize with fear. All ships focus fire on that destroyer, they managed to say. Now. The combined firepower of 6 ships hammered the vessel. It died hard, taking one of the Concordat ships with it. Has watched the friendly vessel explode and felt something break inside them. Then they pushed the grief aside and continued fighting. That was what humans had taught them. Feel everything, but don't let feeling stop you from doing what needs to be done. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships maneuvered and died. Heroes emerged and fell. Doctor and his medical teams worked frantically, saving lives in makeshift trauma centers while the stations shook from weapons impacts. The turning point came when made a gamble. She took a strike force of fast ships, mostly human with some of the Concordat's more aggressive species, and hit the command vessel directly. It was a suicide mission, the kind of tactic that the old Concordat would never have attempted. Park's teams breached the flagship, fighting through corridors in vicious close combat. The humans led the way, their training and mindset suited for this kind of chaos. But the other species kept up, surprising themselves with their own ferocity. They captured the commander, a massive individual named who had led 3 previous conquests. Park dragged him to the bridge at gunpoint. You have a choice, said over the open communication channel. her voice broadcasting to every ship in both fleets. Surrender and retreat, or watch your commander die before your fleet joins him. Laughed a horrible sound. You won't kill me. The Concordat doesn't kill prisoners. They're civilized. The Concordat might not, said, but I'm human. We remember how to be savage when necessary. She pressed her weapon against head. I'll give you 5 seconds to decide. 1. You're bluffing. 2. The fleet hesitated. 3. Has, listening from their ship, felt their respiratory system flutter. They had trained with for years, but in this moment, they genuinely did not know if she would pull the trigger. 4. Wait, shouted. Wait, I order the fleet to withdraw. Held the weapon steady for one more heartbeat. Then she lowered it. Smart choice. She looked directly into the camera. This is commander of the Concordat Defense Force. The age of easy prey is over. Come in.